Welcome back. Hope you all had a nice chat. Hello to everybody on the live stream. I think we've actually got this computer sorted out now. Okay, so this evening I am absolutely delighted, as I said earlier, to welcome both Sho Yamagushiku and Conor Kerr. So fabulous. And I want to welcome Sho first. Sho is a poet, researcher, and reviewer who lives in Victoria, BC. He's like our best kept secret. So just a few weeks ago, we didn't even know he existed. And all of a sudden, he's here with a book from Penguin Random House, Canada. How did that happen? So he's launching this new debut collection called Shima. And he has work previously published in journals like the Capilano Review, Yellow Medicine Review, Nikkei Images, as well as academic publications such as Okinawan Journal of Island Studies. And his work was chosen for the Writers' Trust of Canada Mentorship Program and published in Fire from the Heart. And Sho's creative practice is grounded in diasporic Okinawan Japanese Islander consciousness. And Shima was chosen as a CBC poetry collection to watch out for. Sho writes from the homelands of the Lekwungen and the Wasanic peoples. Please welcome Sho Yamagushiku.
I got my water. Last time I forgot my water and then got myself in trouble. Hello. Good, good. I'm kind of average height, so. What will we achieve if we never look to the sky? And what will we achieve if we never look inside? For if we never look to the sky, then we will never see the stars. And if we never see the stars, then how can we feel our ancestors? And I can't tell you the distance I have fallen, but let me tell you, it is deeper than oceans. So what will we achieve if we never look to the sky? And what will we achieve if we never look inside? So I dedicate those words to Lee Miracle, who was a teacher of mine and posed the question, how do we as newcomers sink root into territory in an ethical and honoring way? And yeah, so that's a lifelong poem that stays with me, and am grateful for her presence. So yeah, I feel like before I start reading, I have a couple I'm thinking a lot about. I'm a little taller than that. I am thinking about relations and thinking about what's, the poems are the poems, but there's some quotes that are sort of circulating around. So I'll start by just reading a couple. The first one is by Kwakwakiwa writer Sarah Hunt. And she says, Emily Carr is seen as having such an intimate relationship with the forest as to produce a work that took on the character and form of the forest itself. It's like the spiritual identification with the nature of the forest affirms settler belonging through a type of selective amnesia, allowing the knowledge of Indigenous existence to suddenly fall away because of the good feelings that come from being one with the land. And as someone who's living in James Bay and surrounded by the spring propaganda that is Victoria, I find a lot of clarity in the feels like there's a war going on there every day that I walk outside of my house. And so that's something that it's like the quotes are sort of circulating around. The next one is Rasha Abdulhadi, a Palestinian poet, and Rasha says, wherever you are, whatever sand you can throw on the gears of genocide, do it now. If it's a handful, throw it. If it's a fingernail full, scrape it out and throw. Get in the way however you can. The elimination of the Palestinian people is not inevitable. We can refuse with our every breath and action. We must. And then the third thing was a conversation I had with my friend Nema, who is in Vanuatu, and it came from some sort of ancestral remembering. And I thought, you know, I was born and I'm living and I will die failing solidarity with Congolese people, thinking about the connectivity of our devices and the mining of cobalt and how that is based on the destruction of community life there. And I think that that's part of, you know, that's part of existence. And so I think to tie all these things together, as I was thinking last night about poetry, you know, I think the poem at any point, maybe quickly or maybe eventually can be used against itself. And so I think there's maybe this idea that poetry has some sort of sacred quality, or it's being used just intrinsically for justice. And I think that any poem can be used to destroy. And so I'm thinking, as I'm working with poems, and I think there's something about putting a poem, publishing it, which is freezing it. And I think part of the work then in readings is to liberate the poem from the page and to keep it alive and to think about how, you know, presence and you know, just to keep that the presence with poetry, it's a constant struggle, and I return to a structure that's based on violence. And so no matter what I read, a poem kind of feels a bit like a knife, and the knife can be used however I choose or however one chooses. And so the poem itself really does nothing. It's about how we move with it in the world when we leave this space. So my collection Shima initially was about disconnection. I think in diaspora, we're sort of, by now, I think the word sold is appropriate. This idea of disconnection, of being separate from home. And so, and you know, there's lots of reasons to feel separate from language, from body, from ancestors, from spirit. As I was writing the collection, I realized that perhaps the idea of being disconnected was false. And in fact, I was perhaps too connected to my ancestors, that I was repeating patterns and caught in cycles that meant that I was trying to free myself from. And so it wasn't that I was too far from my ancestors. It was actually that they were playing far too much of a role in dictating the contours of my everyday life. And so I think about Dion Brand's speaking against nostalgia. And so I think ultimately the collection is about taking the nostalgia and refusing. Dion Brand warns of nostalgia's power, like intoxicating power. That's probably not exactly what she said, but that's how I took it. And so I'm thinking about with the poems, how can I refuse the violence and nostalgia? And I think when I look around, you know, at Japanese colonization, at Israel's occupation, at Canada and the US as you know, the nations that they are, nostalgia is sort of this driver of violence that perhaps can fly under the radar. But I think to me, and when I look at my community, thinking about how to enact a politics around nostalgia is something that is desperately needed. A woman steps from a cloud, crows blackening her hair. She says, "You must return. Gather yourself, leave an offering. You must return. You are never undertaken all at once, and never once and for all." I learned to fashion my mouth as a market of transactions. I learned my endless argument with the ocean is impossible. I divine no sweet potato. I drink no time. I offer myself in sewers and streetcars. I wander down Crenshaw, looking to buy an ancestor. And so this next poem is a full block on the page, and the block on the page represents the ocean. In this case, the Pacific. I think that there's this sort of interplay as something that is both feels insurmountable and then also that I'm inextricably connected to. And I think we have that sort of relationship with people or places, perhaps parts of ourselves. And so this poem is about the sort of brute force, perhaps brute is too strong of a word, but the force that it takes to propel through that. And I think that's part of breaking through nostalgia to return to the body. And so perhaps if there's something that you have a similar relationship to hold as with the poem. My father holds my hair. The evening's last ray of sunshine falls into a furious fight. I'm disintegrating down the coast, my scalp ablaze. With song, with waves, I break shoeless off Santa Monica Pier. Barnacles, knife, starfish, grenade. Their sentience sharp inside of me as the ocean floor deepens. The lights of a container ship flash across the rolling current. Above deck, humans shudder, their stilted grammar pulling against the moon. A current of fairies casts a lunar net, blessing a trench of bioluminescence. All opens between sea and sky. Storm petrels deposit me into the shape of a lone tropic bird. I see my great-grandmother, her white wings. We make a union so precise, a flood of heaving chests is all that we have ever known. I search for a shard of gentleness, anglerfish brandishing themselves against my thighs. I stumble into the carcass of the Kieta Maru, the bones of the silvery dead rattling. I mistake the ship's barnacle-encrusted anchor for a lost treasure. Lusting over steel's certainty, I shove the rusted prongs inside of me. The crown of humans forming the ocean floor shifts, and now the ship is careening, disappearing down the Mariana Trench. A rancid cave in me, all that remains as blood pours. A cadre of neon jellyfish. I am tickled numb by tentacles. I am hilarious with pain. A darkness birthing another darkness. Inside the forts of my childhood, am I becoming oceanic or becoming womb? So now I suppose we're across the Pacific. This next poem is dedicated to those who use culture as a cover for violence. I think that especially culture that is put on a pedestal then becomes an easy tool to manipulate. And so this poem is thinking through how that can happen. And in this context, in Okinawa. By pounding cane, my people step in time, parading eagerly amidst nostalgia's ghostly flags. Everywhere, indigenous regalia sprouts from concrete chests. Naha City opening my brutalist heart. As we journey through limestone, we fortress our royal womb, this place that precedes all. And for a moment, I fade from my body, made weak, too taken to notice a celestially ordained scribe is engraving the parameters of home in the blanking reaches of my cerebellum. I am fixated inside a sun-soaked vision. And in the city below, a restless man is beating his wife. Every time the words peaceful and kingdom collide. Amidst my solar delusion, a faceless man passes through the castle gates. Rising above the parade, he sheds his plastic suit and dons a brass-colored robe, the robe commissioned by the island's cheering thousands. The faceless man has his hand on my shoulder. He has his hand on everyone's shoulder. The faceless man has his hand on my thigh. He has his hand on everyone's thigh. The faceless man whispers, "Be still. I will clothe you in my fibers. Let us exalt in your traditional name." But everything pulsates, and in the harbor in me blood roils, a shuddering prefecture bearing down. If you want to dye me at all, dye me as dark as crow's feather. If you want to dye me but light, pray don't touch me at all. Author unknown, translated by Taira Bintaro. Groping a shadowy hamlet by the small of the sea. Skirting boulders, tiptoeing bones bound for the grave. Passing estuarine fields, chrysanthemum or sugarcane, I don't care. The night's pinnacle, its concern, a soldier ready for harvest. A soldier's load, a fluorescent light, a hideous tower, and the dead wearing our skin, drumming the night's hide. This one's from my friend Victor. We dig bloody moons from the horizon, prayers erupting from our skin. We climb these tall shoots and stems, back bend down to green ground. I can tell my brother is light and heat. I forget mirrors and my hatred of trees. I tell my brother the earth does and does not need saving. And down by the water, songbirds in the shrubs, and kingfisher tumbling and twisting, falling free from tree to tree. So in the age of liberalism, I think there's a lot of pressure to perform justice or perform peace. I think oftentimes that performance is betraying the fact that the root ancestor that started a cycle of violence hasn't ever been confronted or displaced. And so mostly we just have a confusion of the words. And so this poem is the beginning of a contention with the root ancestor. Perhaps it's nothing but a realization of his existence, but I think that that's part of the reason struggle is so constant. I greet my uncle at the harvest festival. He turns his back. The village spreads itself across a feverish water dream. The forest blossoms with my failures. I am ravenous for a golden tradition. I am brimming with fangs and mandates. My eyes are cameras. My feet are clubs. The village is suspended above the water. I am stroking its underbelly. I am stealing glances at my own grave. I am forcing my body inside a closed ritual I am prying at everything that resembles a hinge or a door. I am squeezing a child's throat, demanding to know why my language has no name. I am breaking over an elder's head. I am waking in a living room, my hands roving past the family altar. I am glimpsing the emperor's smile in a villager's tired face. I am swallowing whole offerings of fruit meant for the gods. I am picking flesh from my teeth. The village is tilting on its axis. It is turning. All its organs are spilling across the bay. I am taking the sharpest stick and poking the root ancestor. I am insisting that if he awakens, I will have something useful to say. I count the revolving vertebrae covering the hills and slide my hands up and down my tortured spine. I wade through liquid depths. I wade through liquid depths and crimson greens. The trees form a sprawling rosary, each branch a shivering bead. I mark the forest's death and devastation, caressing where the exiled ones once lived. Their lives speculated as lumber and carted away to build majestic trade ships and towering southern castles. Over the years, I have learned to contort my body flat against the forest's heaving chest. The trees taught me intimacy when the waking world ran from me. Now roots have sprouted like hair from my head, and they have become roads. This forest is every forest, and wide roots can show me love. The surf sweeps the hollows of my back. I see the moon and a shard of me in all their faces, fishing toward the war. Who is that close? Who is that far? I plead for a translator's witness. Please wrap this lament in satin. Please keep these intestines concealed. After spirit, after spirit, after spirit, after the boy who never grasps my hand, with his dawn, I have a slivering chance. To be reborn as sick fish with strange fins. We might have been ancestors, jump against the moonlight, circling the brackish bay. A school traveling through a watery shrine, queer and barren of offerings. Evading my place in the confines of lineage, I glimpse a grave. All this could have schooled me. And by now, we are in the ancestral village and also have refused that. And so I think at its core, the poems are about finding the thing that we cling on to most, or that we are told is the most true essence of that possessive word from, and refusing that because it prevents it from then being enlisted in some sort of state violence. So I have no idea how much time we're at. So I think that's good. And thank you so much, Karen and Planet Earth Poetry. This is the first time I've gotten to read poetry to people who appreciate poetry. So thank you so much. And yeah, I'm really grateful for a space like this. So it feels very full of love. So thank you, Karen.
Thank you so much. It was incredibly powerful work. Everything you said too really resonates, and just gorgeous work. Thank you. Wow. I'm really glad that we could help you launch your book. Yeah. And And now I would love to welcome Conor Kerr, who has travelled all the way from Alberta to read for us tonight. He also read at New Horizons today in James Bay, and I believe a school as well. Yeah. And he'll be offering a workshop tomorrow for a bunch of lucky people. So Conor Kerr is a Métis Ukrainian writer living in Edmonton. He's a member of the Métis Nation of Alberta, and he's descended from the Lac Ste Métis and the Papaschase Cree Nation. And his Ukrainian family are settlers in Treaty 4 and 6 territories in Saskatchewan. He grew up in Saskatoon, Buffalo Pound, Edmonton, and other prairie towns and cities. And in 2022, Conor was named one of the CBC Writers to Watch. And he's won the Fiddlehead, Ralph Gustafson Poetry Prize, the Malahat Review's Long Poem Prize. And he's the author of the poetry collection An Explosion of Feathers, and Old Gods, of course, which was just shortlisted for the 2023 Governor General's Literary Awards. And Conor's novel Avenue of Champions was shortlisted for the Amazon Canada's First Novel Award, longlisted for the Giller Prize, and won the Relit Award. And he has a new novel, which is sitting on the table there, called Prairie Edge, just out. And he's the assistant professor at the University of Alberta, where he teaches creative writing. Please welcome Conor Kerr.
Thank you. See, I think we're good. All right, right on. Thank you all for the warm welcome, and thank you as well for the beautiful reading. It's so powerful to hear just the passion around art and literature, poetry, and what it can do to enact true thinking in this world here. And I really appreciate when we talk about the current state of liberalism, because that's very much what a lot of my writing in the last little bit has been about. And Prairie Edge in particular is about a herd of bison being let loose in the middle of Edmonton, and the response from people who love Indigenous people when we can look at beads and bannock and do all those kind of things. But now that there's actual talk about land back and a return to matriarchal governance structures, and they can't use their dog park anymore, things change pretty fast. Yeah, I write, my poetry comes from a very fictional sense. I realize I write very narrative-based poems. I'm going to share, the first few I'm going to share come from a new book that will be coming out next year in the fall, called Beaver Hills and Amiskwaciwaskahigan, the territory I come from. And it is, it's a poetic novella. And if you ever want to try to not get a book published, write a poetic novella. It's like, what is this? But I thought it was kind of funny. So, and this, it follows 4 Métis characters as they kind of navigate the administrative systems of a university, as well as the working world, and being a contemporary Indigenous people in these spaces where you're not living a stereotypical cultural existence as a lot of non-Indigenous people think you are on a regular basis. So I'm going to kick us off by getting into this first one, and I'll read the first 4, one from each of the characters. First one being the name of the character being Fancy University Boy. The second one, Anti-Prof. The third, Buddy, and the fourth, Baby Mama. And yeah, so we'll start her off. Aho, Fancy University Boy, wears a collared shirt, distinguished. Check came in from Rupert's Land, and he's going to buy some textbook that costs about a quarter of what he paid for his truck. White guy wrote it, but acknowledges unceded territory, but not treaty where he's going to read it. Fancy University Boy is embarrassed about the truck he parks at a friend's auntie's place. She's a prof at the school, gave her a bunch of moose that Buddy and him hunted up last fall. Auntie Prof is happy because she gives it out to all the students who need something to eat, and there's a lot of them. Fancy university boy wants to do something like that, but he doesn't know jack shit about talking to people, and he doesn't know jack shit about how to be a white guy, and he doesn't know jack shit about how to do good in school. He used to get the highest grades back in the town, but that was just because he could read, and no one else could. So the teachers who drove in from the city on the daily said, fuck it, someone has to get an A. May as well be fancy university boy. And he got the A, and he still doesn't know jack shit, but that's about to change when he gets this textbook, and he swears that he's going to read this one. He's going to get invited to a fancy party where people are going to notice his collared shirt, and he's not going to say gonna, he'll say going to, and no one will comment on his Indian accent. Every day he practices saying his G's and turning D's into T's. It'll come, and he won't have to go home, and he'll move to the south side, date white women, and he'll read the textbook. Aho, faculty meeting, and they all turn to her when someone says a land acknowledgement, staring, waiting for some sort of validation. The kind that relieves all the white guilt, but they still teach all sorts of old, dead, white, problematic men and women, and don't really give two shits about all the students who drop out during Shakespeare. And they want her to be everything Indian. Decolonize my course package dropped on Auntie Prof's desk. And she's like, this isn't my fucking job. But she doesn't have tenure or status, and the old white lady does, and has a big say on if Auntie Prof can keep a job going. And she doesn't want to have to apply to other universities because this one is homeland. The other ones don't have a prairie sunset turning rivers all sorts of pinks and purples. She wishes she knew the Cree words for the colors because the English ones don't do it justice. She thinks about her students and her future and all the shit she's gone through to get where she is, and if any of it was worth it. If those grays in her hair that came in hot when she was 25, working through a master's in a room full of shitty hipster bros who thought she owed them her body because they tried in back rooms of faculty parties, but some wimpy ass rich kid who studies poetry isn't going to be able to keep 1,000 generations of matriarchal strength pinned down. And now she watches as he gets tenure and dominates the meetings with land acknowledgements and the right words, always the right words. Couldn't fuck her physically, so tries to do it mentally. And she sits back and knows that she'll never be anything but an angry Indian anti-prof. Aho, Buddy wakes up and he's got one last shift to hammer down before he can go home, grab the kids and that BB gun. Might be a couple swamp donkeys still sniffing butts in the muskeg, and he can round up a couple cousins for a day or two to see if they can put one down, sage up for the freezer. Takes him over to see his cookum. She still wrestles the kids like she used to wrestle Buddy back when his dad would drop him off there on his way to his own site. Buddy's banging away on pipe and thinking about maybe grabbing some flowers for baby mama, maybe heading over to the Earls on Jasper for happy hour, have a couple drinks and laugh like they used to back before kid Payak Newo Nisto, when she still smiled when she looked at him, still laughed at his jokes, still touched his arm, wrapped herself under the faux Pendleton next to him, when Buddy could just feel love, grab some flowers, Earl's happy hour, doesn't know what else to do. He tells a joke and she shakes her head, tells a story, she ignores him, goes, asks for more money, has got that, thank God, but for how long, who knows. He's worried that the work's all gonna get cut up. How the hell does a welder get a job in the digital economy? He hears about his hipster cousin who's shredding through a university degree and fancies himself Munya, not Métis. This time, Buddy's going to talk about his feelings with baby mama. This time, Buddy is going to talk about his feelings with baby mama. This time, Buddy's going to ignore the phone call from his boss, asking him to put in another 10. But he won't, because he knows that he needs every little thing he can get, because there's no room for him in the digital economy of the future. All right, so those are from the new poetic novella that's coming out. And it goes on and on and on, following those characters for probably too long, but that's all right. I'm gonna read a few poems from Old Gods, and Old Gods is it's a book for my grandfather. I felt an Explosion of Feathers, my first poetry book, is, I like to refer to it as emo whiny cowboy junk. It is terrible. I wrote most of it between the ages of 18 and 26. And if you ever want to write and read some really bad poetry, pick that book up, but you probably won't be able to find it. So good luck with that. It's not great, but the book Avenue of Champions was very much about my Métis grandmother who raised me, and she's a very, very, very interesting lady. She's got a ton of good stories. She's currently probably playing cards at the Legion in Parksville and making some cash off of her friends. And yeah, and she always had a real strong presence in Edmonton, in the river valleys there. And when I was a kid, we'd be walking around and she'd look at, you know, the Saskatoon bushes, and she'd be picking Saskatoons, and she'd look down and she'd say, like, you know, this like right here is where like my grandmother's like umbilical cord is buried, where we're tied into the land, where our blood memory exists. We're always a part of this space in this area. And I think about her a lot, and the world that she's been in, and the world that her grandmother had been in too, where they went from the 1870s of, you know, matriarchal governance and Cree structures and legal structures still existing in the prairies to, you know, a city like Edmonton being built all within the time of her life there, and what that really looks like and what that is for kind of a person. And then Old Gods kind of morphed into a book a lot about my grandfather, and, you know, a guy who never thought he would live past the age of like 25, never thought he would have what he did, that he would have a family, all of this, and just thought he'd always exist within prairie poverty. Yeah, so I'm gonna read a couple poems from that book. The first one is called "The Sun's Always Shining in Saskatchewan," which is fitting in Victoria here. I wake up an hour before the dawn, the smell of eggs frying in butter, split breakfast sausages, the discount kind, nabob in the pot, and an old country song on the AM radio singing us the sunrise. You're standing there, old flannel shirt tucked into loose blue jeans, held up by suspenders. You were always way too skinny for your own good, dreaming of a future in your wildest imagination. You couldn't imagine living this long, having this much luxury. Always thought you'd be dead on the prairie, wind and porcupines gnawing away on your bones. I can't imagine that in 5 years you'll be gone. I'll be laid up in bed with a busted up leg, your ashes on the bookshelf next to a bison skull that we dug out of the banks of the Moose Jaw River back when I was still scared to lose everything. Couldn't sleep because of the spins. Wanted nothing more than to make everyone happy, something I still haven't figured out, but you never gave a shit about that kind of thing. The sun's always shining in Saskatchewan. The sun's always shining in Saskatchewan. The sun's always shining in Saskatchewan. I just want to talk to you again. And next poem I'm going to read here is about, it's called Forgotten Grave Sites. And in Edmonton, there's the old Papaschase graveyards are along the river valley. And the city of Edmonton likes to dig them up every once in a while for projects. Whenever they're building something, and they really don't do a great job of trying to protect Indigenous rights in those spaces, as you can imagine. And there's a lot of family, there's a lot of history in these areas, and it's kind of a constant struggle between the Indigenous communities that have been in these spaces and the current colonial structures in these areas here. My grandmother loved telling, she loves telling some great stories too, so I kind of included a couple on here as well. But when I was in my early 20s, I would drink myself into oblivion and walk across the old green Walterdale Bridge, throwing glass Pilsner bottles into the air and wondering just how deep the river was beneath my feet. My grandmother told me of her brother who jumped from the high-level bridge but was picked up by eagles and carried away to the bush of their youth, north of St. Paul de Métis. I thought that maybe an old Namao would rise up out of the swift-moving waters and swallow me whole and carry me in its stomach like red ochre dye back to Montreal. I'd like to speak terrible French with beautiful people while the stars and songs of ancestors bellow out from the plateau. I'd howl into the Papaschase gravestone speaking shattered Cree. The only words I knew were love and how badly I wanted someone to love me. Sit beside my relatives' gravestones, light a cigarette, wish I could afford more booze, try to pinpoint the house that Frank Oliver lives in. He owes me and my family and my friends families and our relations and their families lots of money, but we'll take it back in land. We can release bison through the river valley again and see modern agriculture trampled into prairie grasses. I know the money families are still kicking around, basking in champagne-filled hot tubs and reading each other copies of the Indian Act as a form of comedy. You can only spend so much time trying to be something you're not. I wanted to be rich and elevate above the poverty of my life, to hit another stride of living and join in on old money style worlds. But I'm Métis, born in the dying throes of fur trade paradise and taking refuge under stampeding bison. I find my solace in blood dripping through the bones buried long ago. Shatter earth, shatter my aspiration. I don't want to believe in a river, but what else does one have for gods? I can't believe in money. I tried that and it didn't work. I want to shoot a shotgun up in the air and feel the pellets fall back to the 1880s and smash through the skulls of those who burned down my great-grandmother's house on the south side of the river. They said, repent in the flames, and I too can achieve the benefit of my kinscape, money, and develop a passion for flittering things. But I won't, don't, can't. I believe in stories of grandmothers and aunties and the flowing forever lights from the wall tents in the Mill Creek Ravine. I like the line about, I like the idea of a bunch of rich people sitting in a hot tub filled with champagne, reading each other copies of the Indian Act and just like laughing. I always thought that was just like, I always thought that was a great, like, it would have been like, you know, like a New Yorker cartoon or something. It would be a good one with that. With old gods, I was thinking about the idea of like what this like, well, just that colonialism is so new on these territories and in these spaces when you think about the world and, you know, time and what time is and what we really think of when it comes to this idea of religious spirituality and what a god actually is. And I was spending a lot of time with an elder, a guy named Bob Cardinal, and we would go moose hunting all the time and hanging out, and he often talked about the moose as a god, or, you know, the land itself as a god, or the river as a god, all these different things as the idea of creator, the idea of creation, the idea of something that we should be, you know, not necessarily worshiping in the ideas of a Western construct, but worshiping within our own selves so that we're creating a better relationship with the land and our other relations around us. So I'm going to read a couple more. This one's called Camping, and it's one of my less narrative ones, but I just like the imagery in it a bit, so I thought I'd share it. Break dawn with Yenisip wings whistling through crisp darkness. The first visitors on an egg crack horizon sunrise. Fall light is yolk hitting a cast iron pan on the wood stove, burning birch in the old canvas tent. A kettle filled with muskeg tea simmers through the seasons, topped up with first snow. Under changing leaves, northern lights. The dogs howl back at coyote wails, and the ghosts of all those who will stand witness to a new day join them in their song. Right. I'm going to read two more here. One being the title poem from the book. It's called Old Gods. And when I was a kid in southern Saskatchewan, and it seems wild now, but in Regina or Saskatoon, there was a church group, and they would basically drive a giant yellow bus into the inner cities and load up all the native kids that they could find, and then drive us to a Bible camp. And we thought it was great because we got to go to Bible camp and run around. And later on, you know, you're like, that was really, 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 really sketchy. But we all, yeah, as kids, we thought it was awesome. So we got to go play in the, you know, at this Bible camp for a couple of weeks, and then they would ship us all back into the cities. Yeah, good times in the late 90s and early 2000s in Saskatchewan. But yeah, so I thought that was the poem I wanted to write. But I also love, because our camp, of course, was like dirt ass poor. And there was the really rich camp down the road called Arlington, and they had horses and a climbing wall. And every once in a while, they would let us go there, and you could just see the horror on their faces when you got all these Métis and Cree and Anishinaabe and Soto kids running around, and oh, it was fun. But anyways, this is called Old Gods. Lord, it's me, Connor. You know I'm about as anti-religious as it gets, and I haven't seriously considered a Christian God since I was 12 at the inner city native Bible camp outside of Regina, or the time I tried to impress a woman by knowing weird biblical facts. And you can imagine just how well that went over. But really, I just wanted to say that you should get the fuck out of Dodge. Your days on Kitaska now are numbered, have been for a long time now. The old ones are coming back strong. They never left, just bided their time. And I can see them now in the whirlwinds that kick up on old northern lakes. And I can see them now in the back eddies on the rivers and creeks. And I can see them now in the new growth birch groves and forests. And I can see them now in the faces of those walking through downtowns. And I can see them now in the blazing orange fur of a newborn bison calf. And I can see them now in the etchings on bull moose antlers. Pretty soon, you'll be able to see them too. All right, I'm going to, so there's one more and then I'm going to do my closing poem here. I'm just gonna share this one quick because I was living in Vancouver and I really liked Vancouver. But I also realized how much of a prairie boy I am and how much I miss a land and a space and the beauty within it. And I was homesick a lot. I was going back to visit friends often, and I was going back for the falls to go hunting and to spend time with family out there as well. And thinking a lot about the landscapes. And we talk about like the prairie that we know now would look a lot different when the bison herds used to be able to shape the land as they would and shape the grasses, shape the trees. And an elder or a knowledge keeper, a guy named Dwayne Donald, who's a professor at the U of A, he talks about how the Edmonton River Valley would look completely different when the bison herds would be running through, and what that would actually look like. And I think about that imagery of what a natural state of prairie actually is. And in that book, Prairie Edge, the intro paragraph starts in the 1870s following a Métis bison hunting brigade, the last one going down into following the bison herd to the medicine line, the American-Canadian border, and knowing, and the kind of final scene is this young woman sitting beside an elder watching the bison go, knowing they can't go any farther south because the American cavalry are in their war with the Sioux at this point, as well as they might not be able to get back across, and that the bison herds now like dwindled to nothing. And watching from, a hill on the prairie as this bison herd goes and knowing that you'll never see them again. And what devastation that would be for an entire community to, see something that your entire governance structure, your legal system, your livelihood, your entire life has been built around, gone into the prairie dust, and knowing that they'll never come back again. So this poem is called Prairie Dust. The morning when you realize that home never existed, it's just in the idea of the dirt and dust kicked up by pickup trucks at old uncontrolled prairie intersections where the rustiest bucket gets the right of way and the coolest farmer barely twitches the finger on the top of the steering wheel to acknowledge you coming back from cities that only work over the money that you make from self-destruction, from selling out, from abandoning a dream, all the things that when you wake up, you'll try and unsee. It gets the darkest before the dawn. That's okay. Home is when you realize that there will always be a story living on. All right, and I'm going to read one last poem, and this one is called What Do You Believe In? And I wrote it, a few friends of mine in Winnipeg, and Winnipeg is an incredible city with a lot of incredible Indigenous activism happening on a regular basis that's making a real change for our communities directly. Not one that you might not necessarily see in the news, but work that's happening on a community level to support us. And there's a Métis collective there called Red River Echoes, and they do a lot of work to promote basically Métis governance structures and a reclamation of our cultural identity and language in a contemporary life. And they started a little bit of a magazine, and they asked me to write a poem for it. And this was my kind of response to them. And I tried to create it. I tried to create it with a bit of a an idea of hope, because I often find that we tend to dwell on the negative a little bit too much when there's been so much work that's gone on to create a space for people to be even able to read, to share stories, to write books from an Indigenous perspective for Indigenous peoples. Yeah, so this is my last poem in Old Gods, and it's called What Do You Believe In? Do you believe in the ghosts of aunties and uncles that drive old single bench pickup trucks spotted with bullet hole rust, sweetgrass and beaded necklaces dangling from the rearview mirror, those who dream forever of empty stretches of prairie trail turned concrete road, passed over by generations of everyone who held the memory of you close, those who believed in you even when you didn't believe that the future could be infinite for all of us who live under and within endless sky, endless prairie wool, endless bison, and endless coveys of sharp-tailed grouse? Do you believe in sitting on the shores of the Saskatchewan River next to Naheoak cousins, planning out the moose hunts that will keep meat flowing back into Amiskwaciwaskahigan for another winter so that all of our relations can taste the blood and body of a true Eucharist, the earth made whole through the eyes of a 2-year-old bull moose, his flesh sustaining and forever nurturing our kinship spirits that only move us further towards understanding who we were always meant to be? Do you believe in the beauty of the wrinkles around an old lady's eyes while she sits wrapped up in a homemade quilt, sipping muskeg tea next to the wood-burning stove, each line 1,000 laughs, 1,000 tears, 1,000 stories spilled out so that we can move forward in a good way, holding truth next to our hearts, sustained through the crackle of birch burning dark into the night, forever holding onto our place next to the grandmothers who defined what it means to be family? Do you believe in singing loud into the night, barn dances replaced by pubs and karaoke machines, potato champagne by cheap bottles of Pilsner? Oh no, not I will survive. Oh, as long as I know how to love, I know I'll stay alive. Rippling through the air to the backdrop of fading fiddles, spoons, and the tapping of beer bottles on hardtop tables, cards swooshing as they're dealt high into the air. Bet on us because we're not going anywhere. Never were, never will. Gloria Gaynor had it right all along. Do you believe in those who aren't born yet? Those who will come after us? Those who will take back the land from the ID of Canada and give it away to the grasses? Eradicate the machinery, tear it down, build it up. Believe in the words and the way that pride is written all over the faces of those who learn what it means to own ourselves, to never bow under hell on earth, to never step back, but always move forward, knowing that within this landscape, we are reborn, awoken, brought back by the artists and the writers, the poets and the dancers, the musicians and the lovers, the beaters and the hunters, because I do. I believe in everything. Thank you all. It was a pleasure.
Holy wow.